Aaron Gilmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And today is St. Patrick's Day. No one actually mentioned that today. And I'd like to actually pass a blessing that was passed down to my family. May your blessings outnumber the shamrocks that grow and trouble avoid you wherever you go, Mr. Speaker. And that is probably a good adage for the Labour Party today, because we had Phil Goff start off today talking about, not about the economy, not about the budget policy statement, but he wouldn't let David Cunliffe speak first on the budget policy statement. And what does that tell you, Mr. Speaker? We had Annette King talk about, worried about tax cuts and migration and wage gaps. We had Russell Norman talk about peak oil again. We had Sir Roger talk about 29% government spending GDP, and I'll get all this in a minute. We had David Cunliffe so frustrated with Stephen Joyce, all he could do was give him a name, and he was fixated on Stephen Joyce's hand and breaking. We had David Parker, who just believed this government's done nothing and current account deficits have skyrocketed. Well, Mr. Speaker, all I can say is dreams are free. This government has outlined throughout the Prime Ministerial statement, the budget policy statement, 6 key pillars for the future of our country. We're going to reduce red tape. We're going to improve infrastructure. We're going to change tax. We're going to bring in some innovation and improve trade. We're going to improve skills in our country. And we're going to actually get some public sector productivity. So, what have we been doing? What have we been doing to get this so far? Let's talk about a few of these things. Well, I must admit, one of these things that we've started, we set up a whole bunch of task force, Mr. Speaker. The first one was, I must give some credit to the opposition. They set up the Capital Markets Task Force, and they did it in their time, and good on them. Good on them. It was a good piece of work to initiate, but we finished it, and they actually pointed out a whole bunch of changes to our capital markets. Well, we will see. If you look at what else came out, the tax working group policy. The tax working group come out with a whole bunch of changes to our tax system. 76% of our tax is paid by 10% of New Zealanders. And we cannot continue to do that, Mr. Speaker, because what will happen? Good young people will jump on planes and go overseas. And that's what happened under that government over there when they were in power. Thousands of young people left this country and didn't come home. But what's happened in the last 6 to 12 months? What's happened? 22,000 more people have come home from overseas because they believe in a national-led government and a John Key as Prime Minister. That's the signal that shows you the change that the people believe in. What we've seen, and also I believe, Mr. Speaker, we've actually seen a large number of other areas that were put forward in terms of reform and changes that's announced as part of our budget policy statement. Major changes at balance sheet management for the Crown, ACC, Kiwi Rail, student loans were an absolute mess and needed to have some changes, Mr. Speaker, and we've actually outlined a series of areas to change those, to bring those things back under control. We paid essentially $1 billion for a train set. The only one that got happy at it was a gentleman in Australia who had headlines about it. And Mr. Speaker, we're trying hard to fix those things and fix ACC. We inherited billions of dollars around that. Mr. Speaker, last week we had the pleasure of seeing some further announcements on changes to science and innovation, particularly around the CRI sector. We actually saw the ability that we need to increase lengthen out the contracts that exist and give CRIs a bit more flexibility in some arrangements. And I think it's a wonderful thing. We saw last week, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announce world-leading hires in our science sector and giving out over $1 million to our world-leading scientists. And a couple of those people I've had quite a bit of time to do with, particularly in the area of the superconductors. And that, yes, well, it's exactly. It's a Mr. Miller's lecture. It's a wonderful development, actually, with the good people at IRL. And I thank them for that. But we've announced some major changes to the electricity sector to stop the 87% price rise that occurred in the last 9 years under a Labor government. See, what's the problem with Labor? What they're suffering from is, I believe my good colleague Tony Ryle called relevance deprivation syndrome. They don't want to talk about the budget. They don't want to talk about the future of New Zealand. They want to nitpick about little bits of detail and argue amongst themselves. So we had the 3 triplets sitting here who all, I notice, have gone. The 3 triplets of the Labor Party doom, who are all sitting there worrying about the leadership ambitions for the Labor Party, worrying about nitpicking issues of bus trips, naughty kids. I mean, we had, Mr. Speaker, yesterday, we had a leading member of the backbench of the Labor Party run around criticise children on planes. That's what they talk about. Children on planes, worry about family issues, not worry about important things that matter to New Zealand. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, when you go around and actually talk to the people, not on a bus trip with your 5 mates, and you turn around and you actually talk to the people, they actually say they care about what matters in people's homes. They care about the economy, they care about their future and they care about their families. Mr Speaker, we heard from the Labour Party they were worried about jobs and things like that. Well, I'll give you a good example that happened recently in Christchurch. We had, under Labour, we had aquaculture stuck in a rut, 7 years of trying to do nothing at all. Nothing was going to get approved at all. Well, I can tell you, Mr Speaker, in recent months we had an offshore mussel farm approved, the first ever in New Zealand history, to go in Pegasus Bay. That's going to make 200 jobs and $60 million a year of exports. And that party, for 7 years, they didn't want to do anything. Mr Speaker, that's 200 jobs more that they didn't care about because they didn't want to do anything. There's another example of what we did. Mr Speaker, we've announced a big change in the welfare reform part of the budget policy statement. And I want to touch on one in particular. We had this great policy called Community Max. In my part of town, we had some wonderful things and projects happen. And we had the Labour Party run round and criticise Community Max as a waste of time and a waste of effort. Well, I love to see the fact that the member for Rimutaka, Chris Hipkins, actually thinks that, and I quote, that anything that could give people a second chance education is a wonderful investment, and he was at a camp last week on Community Max to learn about the achievements and what a wonderful thing that was. So here's the member, a member for the party running around criticising our policy openly in this House, but home in his community, he thinks Community Max is a wonderful thing. Because it works, Mr Speaker, it works. Seeing Mr Hipkins here, turn around and prove it. Mr Speaker, we're worried about jobs and we're worried about employment, but the key thing is actually getting the private sector to invest and make jobs. It's good companies in a situation like Wholesome Cement here that are based in Christchurch, and they're looking at spending over $550 million on a new cement park. My colleagues' electorate here, down in Oamaru. And Mr Speaker, under the Labour government, they weren't going to do that. They were basically going to shut up shop and leave the country. Well, I can tell you, Mr Speaker, I spent some days with them in recent weeks during the recess period, and I'm pleased to say that they're very keen to invest in New Zealand under a national government because they like our 6 pillars. They like the fact that we're having to invest in infrastructure. They like the fact we're going to reform the tax system and bring in some more innovation. They like the fact we're happy to invest in public sector productivity, and they love the fact we're going to invest in national standards to bring some more skilled workforce to our country. Because, Mr Speaker, those are the things that really matter to mum and dad out there in the community. Not worried about, nitpicking about where kids sit on a plane. Not worrying about, who's going to be next leader of the Labour Party. But, Mr Speaker, I want to touch on another aspect that I think, I leave my long-suffering colleagues over here in Labour alone. We had the Green member, Russell Norman, talk about worrying about oil. Well, I'm pleased to say, Mr Speaker, 2 years ago, in the last few years, oil has become one of the leading exports in New Zealand. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And long may the oil price continue while we continue to pump out 60,000 barrels a day out of our new oil fields. Because, Mr Speaker, we believe here in our party that one of the great things to get our economy growing is actually the stuff that comes underground to sell to our good friends in China and India, who are very happy to buy it. Because over there that we hear the opposition run around and talk about mining in national parks. Well, it was that party that approved one of the most successful operations in Pike River Coal on the west coast of the South Island. And I mean, there's a word to describe that, Mr Speaker, but I'm not going to talk about what that is. Mr Speaker, our natural resources wealth has the ability to create massive jobs. I know, in particular, in the oil sector alone, we have the ability to triple our exports and create thousands of jobs up and down the country, both in the South Island and the North Island. And right now, there are companies drilling for oil up our coast who have a wonderful situation. Mr Speaker, I just want to sum up by talking about the ability that we've heard that this budget policy statement is another plank in the wonderful step of creating a brighter future for New Zealand, led forward by our wonderful Prime Minister John Key. And it's so good that the public of New Zealand has endorsed it in a way by continued high poll ratings and the lack of support for the Labour Party because they can't even get more people on their bus than the MPs that they wander around the country. And if they can't sort that out, long may it continue, because I look forward to many years sitting on this side of the benches and hearing the other side of the benches whinge and moan. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. Party vote?
Yes.
Clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National?
58 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour?
43 votes opposed.
Green Party?
9 votes opposed.
ACT New Zealand?
5 votes in favour.
Māori Party?
Tokori mai tautoko ana.
Progressive?
1 opposed.
United Future?
1 vote in favour.
Point of order, John Boscawen.
Seek leave to correct our vote. 4 votes in favour. I
4
apologise.
votes in favour. The record